The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Adelaide Cottage as Princess Charlotte sat at her small wooden desk, carefully practicing her handwriting. Her pink tongue poked out slightly in concentration as she formed each letter with deliberate precision. The 8-year-old princess had always been particular about her schoolwork, a trait that made her governess smile with pride. "Charlotte, darling, time for breakfast," called Maria, her nanny, from the doorway. The warm Spanish accent in her voice always made Charlotte feel safe and loved. Maria had been with the Wales family since George was born, and she knew each child's moods and needs like a second mother. Charlotte looked up from her work, her brown eyes sparkling in the morning light. She had inherited her father's eyes and her mother's determined spirit, a combination that often led to interesting conversations at the breakfast table. Today, however, something felt different in the house. There was a tension in the air that even a child could sense. As she made her way down the corridor, Charlotte could hear hushed voices coming from her parents' study. Prince William's voice carried a tone she recognized, the same one he used when discussing serious royal matters on the phone. Her mother's voice was softer, almost strained, though Charlotte couldn't make out the words. The breakfast room was already alive with activity when Charlotte entered. Prince George, her older brother, was already seated and working his way through a bowl of cereal while simultaneously trying to read a book about space exploration. Louis, her younger brother, was making airplane noises as he moved his spoon through his porridge, creating tiny storms in the bowl. "Good morning, Lottie," George said without looking up from his book. He had started calling her by this nickname recently, and while she pretended to find it annoying, she secretly loved how it sounded when he said it. "Morning, George." "Morning, Lou," Charlotte replied, settling into her usual seat. She noticed that neither of her parents had joined them yet, which was unusual. Typically, breakfast was family time, one of the few moments in their busy days when they could all be together without the weight of royal duties pressing down on them. Maria appeared with Charlotte's favorite breakfast, scrambled eggs with a small portion of smoked salmon and a slice of wholemeal toast cut into triangles. "Your parents will be down shortly," she said, answering the question that Charlotte hadn't yet asked. "They're just finishing up some important discussions." As Charlotte ate, she found her mind wandering to the previous evening. There had been something different about dinner, too. Her mother, Catherine, had seemed quieter than usual, and there had been several moments when Charlotte had caught her parents exchanging meaningful glances across the table. It was the kind of silent conversation that adults had when they were worried about something, but didn't want to concern the children. The sound of footsteps in the corridor announced her parents' arrival. Prince William entered first, his usually perfectly styled hair slightly disheveled, suggesting he had been running his hands through it, something he did when stressed. Princess Catherine followed, and Charlotte immediately noticed that her mother's smile, while warm and genuine, seemed to require more effort than usual. "Good morning, my loves," Catherine said, moving around the table to kiss each child on the forehead. When she reached Charlotte, she lingered for just a moment longer, her hand gently smoothing down her daughter's hair. "Sorry we're late," William said, taking his seat at the head of the table. "We had some early calls to make." He reached for the coffee pot, and Charlotte noticed his hands were moving with the careful precision of someone trying to appear calm. The conversation during breakfast was lighter than the mood suggested it should be. They talked about George's upcoming school project on renewable energy, Louis's latest adventure in the garden, where he had discovered a family of hedgehogs, and Charlotte's piano lesson scheduled for that afternoon. "Mrs. Patterson says I'm getting much better at playing with both hands," Charlotte announced proudly. "She thinks I might be ready to try a more difficult piece soon." "That's wonderful, darling," Catherine replied, her genuine pride shining through despite whatever was troubling her. Music has always been such a beautiful way to express feelings. As breakfast wound down, William's phone buzzed against the table. Charlotte saw her father's jaw tighten as he read whatever message had appeared on the screen. He showed it to Catherine, whose face went pale for just a moment before she regained her composure. "Children, why don't you go and get ready for your lessons?" Catherine suggested gently. Charlotte, Remember you have mathematics with Mr. Henderson this morning, and then history after lunch. The three children began to file out of the breakfast room, but Charlotte lingered in the doorway, something compelling her to look back. She saw her parents lean toward each other across the table, their voices dropping to urgent whispers. Whatever they were discussing was clearly serious, and it was clearly about something that couldn't wait. Charlotte made her way to the schoolroom, but her mind wasn't on her upcoming mathematics lesson. Instead, she found herself thinking about the changes she had noticed in recent weeks. There had been more hushed phone calls, more serious conversations between her parents when they thought the children weren't listening, and more visits from people in dark suits who spoke in the formal tones reserved for official business. The schoolroom was a bright, cheerful space on the second floor of Adelaide Cottage, with windows that looked out over the gardens where Charlotte often played with her brothers. Mr. Henderson was already there, arranging papers and textbooks on the large wooden table where Charlotte did her lessons. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness," he said with a warm smile. Mr. Henderson had been Charlotte's tutor for 2 years, and he had a gift for making even the most challenging subjects seem interesting and accessible. "Good morning, Mr. Henderson," Charlotte replied, settling into her chair. She tried to focus on the mathematics problems he had prepared for her, but her mind kept drifting back to the scene at breakfast. As the morning progressed, Charlotte found herself struggling to concentrate. Usually, she enjoyed the logical progression of mathematical problems, the way each step built upon the previous one to reach a clear solution. Today, however, the numbers seemed to blur together on the page, and she found herself making careless mistakes that she would normally never make. "Is everything all right, Your Royal Highness?" Mr. Henderson asked gently. "You seem a bit distracted this morning." Charlotte looked up from her work, considering how to answer. She had been taught from an early age that family matters were private, that the concerns and challenges faced by her parents in their royal roles were not subjects for casual discussion. But she also trusted Mr. Henderson, and the worry that had been building inside her all morning was becoming difficult to contain. "I think my parents are worried about something," she said finally. "They've been having lots of serious conversations lately, and this morning they seemed different." Mr. Henderson nodded thoughtfully. He had worked with the royal family long enough to understand the unique pressures they faced, and he had seen how even young children could be affected by the weight of public scrutiny and responsibility. "Sometimes adults have to deal with difficult situations," he said carefully. "The important thing to remember is that your parents love you very much, and whatever they're facing, they're handling it together. Your job is to focus on being a child, on your lessons, your friends, your hobbies, and all the wonderful things that make up your world." Charlotte nodded, finding some comfort in his words. She returned to her mathematics problems with renewed focus, determined to push her worries aside for the remainder of the lesson. When the mathematics session ended, Charlotte had a short break before her history lesson was due to begin. She decided to spend the time in the library, a cozy room lined with books that range from classic literature to modern children's stories. It was one of her favorite places in the house, a quiet sanctuary where she could think and read without interruption. She was browsing through a book about medieval castles when she heard voices coming from the corridor outside. The library door was slightly ajar, and she recognized her mother's voice along with that of her private secretary, Hannah. The comments were particularly harsh this time, Hannah was saying. The social media monitoring team flagged several posts that crossed the line from criticism into personal attacks. Some of them specifically mentioned the children. Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. She knew she shouldn't be listening, but something about the serious tone of the conversation made it impossible to move away from the door. "I don't understand how people can be so cruel," her mother's voice replied, and Charlotte could hear the pain beneath the controlled tone. "I know it comes with the territory, but when it involves the children, the security team is aware, and they're monitoring the situation closely," Hannah continued. "Most of it is just keyboard warriors who would never act on their words, but we're taking the appropriate precautions nonetheless." Charlotte felt a chill run down her spine. She had always known that her family was in the public eye, that people had opinions about everything they did, but she had never really understood that some of those opinions could be cruel or threatening. The idea that strangers on the internet were saying mean things about her mother, possibly even about her, and her brothers was both frightening and confusing. "I just want to protect them," Catherine's voice continued. "They're so young, and they don't deserve to be dragged into adult conflicts and judgments. Charlotte especially. She's so sensitive and perceptive. She picks up on everything, and I worry about how much she understands." The mention of her own name made Charlotte's heart race. She pressed herself closer to the door, straining to hear every word. "Children are more resilient than we sometimes give them credit for," Hannah replied gently. "And Charlotte has the benefit of growing up in a family that prioritizes love and support above all else. The negative voices are loud, but they don't represent the majority of people who admire and respect your family." "I know you're right," Catherine said. "It's just that sometimes when I see her looking at me with those thoughtful eyes, I wonder what questions she's afraid to ask. I wonder what she's piecing together from the bits and pieces she overhears." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears as she listened to her mother's words. She could hear the love and concern in Catherine's voice, but she could also hear the sadness and worry. Her mother was trying to protect her from something, but Charlotte wasn't entirely sure what that something was. The sound of footsteps moving away from the library door broke Charlotte out of her eavesdropping trance. She quickly moved away from the entrance and returned to her chair, picking up the book about medieval castles and pretending to read. But the words on the page might as well have been written in a foreign language for all the sense they made to her racing mind. When her history lesson began an hour later, Charlotte found it even more difficult to concentrate than she had during mathematics. Her mind kept returning to the conversation she had overheard, trying to piece together the implications of what her mother and Hannah had discussed. Miss Roberts, her history teacher, was discussing the Tudor period and the challenges faced by royal families throughout history. Normally, Charlotte found these lessons fascinating, particularly the stories about strong female rulers who had navigated complex political situations. Today, however, the parallels between historical royal families and her own seemed uncomfortably relevant. Royal children throughout history have always lived with unique challenges, Miss Roberts was explaining. They had to balance their roles as public figures with their needs as private individuals. Even young princesses had to learn how to handle criticism and public scrutiny while maintaining their sense of self. The words felt like they were being spoken directly to Charlotte's current situation. She raised her hand tentatively. "Miss Roberts, how did royal children in the past deal with people saying mean things about their families?" Miss Roberts paused, clearly recognizing that this wasn't simply an academic question. "Well, Your Royal Highness, they learned that public opinion often reflects the challenges and anxieties of the times rather than the truth about the individuals involved. They were taught to focus on their own actions and values rather than the judgments of others." Charlotte nodded thoughtfully. "But didn't it still hurt their feelings when people were unkind?" "I'm sure it did," Miss Roberts replied gently. "Being human means feeling hurt when others are unkind, regardless of one's position in life. But they also learned that they had people who loved and supported them, and that those relationships were more important than the opinions of strangers." The lesson continued, but Charlotte found herself thinking more about the conversation than about Tudor history. She was beginning to understand that her family faced challenges she had never fully comprehended, and that her mother was trying to shield her from difficulties that were perhaps inevitable. When the afternoon lessons ended, Charlotte decided to spend some time in the garden. The fresh air and physical activity usually helped her think more clearly, and she needed to process everything she had learned and overheard during the day. The gardens at Adelaide Cottage were extensive and beautiful, with carefully tended flower beds, mature trees, and plenty of space for children to run and play. Charlotte made her way to her favorite spot, a small gazebo surrounded by climbing roses that her mother had planted shortly after they moved to the cottage. As she sat in the peaceful surroundings, Charlotte tried to organize her thoughts. She understood now that there were people who said unkind things about her mother, possibly about her entire family. She understood that her parents were working hard to protect her and her brothers from those harsh words. But she also realized that her sensitivity to the mood changes in her house meant that she was already being affected by the situation, even without knowing the specific details. The sound of footsteps on the garden path interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see her mother approaching, having changed out of her formal morning attire into more casual clothes suitable for outdoor time with the children. "There you are, darling," Catherine said with a smile that seemed more natural than the one Charlotte had seen at breakfast. "I was wondering if you'd like to help me with some planting. I thought we could add some new flowers to the border near the kitchen window." Charlotte nodded eagerly. Working in the garden with her mother was always one of her favorite activities. There was something soothing about the routine of digging, planting, and watering that made conversation flow more easily. As they worked together, kneeling side by side in the soft earth, Charlotte found herself stealing glances at her mother's face. Catherine looked more relaxed than she had that morning, but there were still small signs of tension around her eyes that Charlotte had learned to recognize. "Mummy," Charlotte said carefully as she helped position a small lavender plant in its new home, "is everything all right? You and Daddy seemed worried this morning." Catherine paused in her digging, her hands stilling on the small garden trowel. Charlotte could see her mother choosing her words carefully, the way adults did when they wanted to be honest, but also protective. "Sometimes, darling, grown-ups have to deal with situations that are complicated and not always pleasant," Catherine said finally. "Daddy and I are working through some challenges, but nothing that affects how much we love you and your brothers, and nothing that should worry you." Charlotte nodded, but she wasn't entirely satisfied with the answer. She could tell that her mother was being truthful as far as she went, but she was also holding back information that she thought Charlotte was too young to handle. "Are people being mean to you?" Charlotte asked quietly, remembering fragments of the conversation she had overheard. Catherine looked at her daughter with surprise and a touch of sadness. "Why do you ask that, sweetheart?" Charlotte felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "I didn't mean to listen, but I heard you talking to Hannah earlier about people on the internet saying mean things." Catherine sat back on her heels, setting down her gardening tools. She reached out and gently touched Charlotte's face, her fingers cool from the soil, but warm with love. "Oh, my darling girl," she said softly. "I hoped you wouldn't have to think about such things for a few more years yet." Charlotte felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I don't like that people are being mean to you. You're the kindest person I know." Catherine pulled Charlotte into a gentle hug, not minding that they both had dirt on their hands and clothes. "Thank you for saying that, sweetheart. It means more to me than you can imagine." They sat together in the garden as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grass. Charlotte felt safe in her mother's arms, but she also felt a new awareness of the complexities that surrounded their family life. She was beginning to understand that being a princess meant more than pretty dresses and official events. It also meant facing criticism and unkindness from people who didn't really know them. As the day drew toward evening, Charlotte found herself looking forward to bedtime more than usual. Not because she was particularly tired, but because she hoped that the quiet, private time with her parents might bring some clarity to the questions and worries that had been building throughout the day. Little did she know that the conversation awaiting her at bedtime would reveal truths that would change her understanding of her family's challenges forever. The evening routine at Adelaide Cottage was a cherished ritual that brought the Wales family together after their busy days. As the sun began to set behind the trees, casting a warm golden glow through the windows, Charlotte helped her mother prepare dinner while her brothers set the table and her father finished up some final work calls in his study. Charlotte found comfort in these ordinary moments, chopping vegetables alongside her mother, listening to Lewis tell elaborate stories about his imaginary adventures, watching George explain his latest scientific discoveries to anyone who would listen. It was during these times that their royal status seemed to fade into the background, and they were simply a family sharing the day's experiences. "How was your mathematics lesson today?" Catherine asked as she stirred a pot of soup on the stove. The kitchen smelled wonderful, filled with the aromas of homemade bread and the vegetable soup that had become one of Charlotte's favorites. "Better after lunch," Charlotte replied honestly. "I was a bit distracted this morning, but Mr. Henderson was very patient with me." She paused, debating whether to say more. "I kept thinking about things I'd overheard." Catherine nodded thoughtfully, but didn't press for details. She had learned that Charlotte often needed time to process her thoughts before she was ready to share them fully. Prince William emerged from his study just as they were putting the finishing touches on dinner. Charlotte noticed immediately that he looked more relaxed than he had that morning, though there was still a tightness around his eyes that suggested the day's serious conversations weren't entirely resolved. "Perfect timing," Catherine said, greeting him with a quick kiss on the cheek. "Could you call the boys?" "Everything's ready." Dinner conversation was livelier than breakfast had been. George enthusiastically described a science experiment his class had conducted involving chemical reactions and color changes. Lewis regaled them with a detailed account of the hedgehog family he had been observing in the garden, complete with names he had assigned to each family member and theories about their daily routines. Charlotte contributed to the conversation, but she found herself watching her parents more closely than usual. She noticed the way her father's hand briefly touched her mother's shoulder when he passed behind her chair, a gesture of support that seemed both automatic and intentional. She observed how her parents exchanged small smiles when one of her brothers said something particularly amusing, as if they were sharing private moments of joy despite whatever challenges they were facing. "Charlotte, you're being very observant tonight," William noted, catching her studying gaze. "What's going through that clever mind of yours?" Charlotte felt her cheeks warm slightly. "I was just thinking about how nice it is when we're all together like this," she said truthfully. "Sometimes during the day, when you and Mummy are having important meetings or serious conversations, the house feels different." Catherine and William exchanged one of those meaningful glances that Charlotte was becoming increasingly adept at recognizing. It was the kind of look that contained entire conversations, acknowledgement, concern, decision-making, and agreement all communicated in a single moment. "You're very perceptive, sweetheart," Catherine said gently. "It's true that sometimes Daddy and I have to discuss serious matters, but family time is always the most important part of our day." After dinner, the family moved to the sitting room for their evening wind-down time. George settled with a book about astronomy. Lewis played quietly with his toy cars, and Charlotte curled up with her current favorite novel, though she found herself reading the same paragraph repeatedly without absorbing the words. As the evening progressed, Charlotte noticed that her parents seemed to be having an ongoing silent conversation. Small gestures, brief touches, meaningful looks, they were communicating about something important without saying a word. She had seen this behavior before during times of stress or significant decision-making, and she was beginning to understand that it meant they were working through something together. When it came time for the bedtime routine, Charlotte felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. The events of the day had raised so many questions in her mind, and she hoped that the quiet, private time with her parents might provide some answers. Lewis was the first to be tucked in, as was traditional. At 6 years old, he still required the full bedtime story experience, complete with different voices for different characters and interactive participation in the narrative. Tonight, William regaled him with an adventure story about a brave young prince who discovered a magical forest behind his castle, complete with talking animals and hidden treasures. Charlotte listened from the doorway, smiling at her little brother's delighted giggles and her father's theatrical performance. Despite the serious undertones of the day, her parents never let their adult worries interfere with their children's need for joy and imagination. George came next. At 10 years old, he was beginning to outgrow bedtime stories, but he still enjoyed the conversation time with his parents. Tonight, he wanted to discuss his upcoming school project and share some interesting facts he had learned about solar energy. Catherine listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions that encouraged George to think more deeply about his research. Finally, it was Charlotte's turn. She made her way to her bedroom, a cozy space decorated in soft blues and whites, with bookshelves lining one wall and a comfortable reading chair positioned near the window. Her parents followed, as was their custom, ready for the quiet conversation that had become an important part of Charlotte's bedtime routine. Charlotte settled under her covers, feeling the familiar comfort of her favorite stuffed animal, a well-loved bunny that had been with her since she was very small. William sat on the edge of her bed, while Catherine took the chair nearby, both of them giving Charlotte their full attention. "It's been quite a day," Catherine said gently. "How are you feeling about everything?" Charlotte considered the question carefully. She had learned that her parents valued honesty and thoughtful responses, and she wanted to express her feelings accurately rather than simply saying what she thought they wanted to hear. "Confused," she said finally. "I keep feeling like there are important things happening that I don't understand. And I can tell you and Daddy are worried about something, but I don't know what it is or how to help." William reached out and gently smoothed Charlotte's hair away from her face. "You're very wise for 8 years old," he said with a mixture of pride and sadness. "Sometimes I wish you didn't have to be quite so aware of adult concerns." "But I am aware," Charlotte replied. "Pretending I don't notice things won't make them go away." Catherine leaned forward in her chair. "You're absolutely right about that, darling. Your father and I have been discussing whether and how to talk to you children about some of the challenges we're facing." Charlotte felt her heart rate increase. "Are we in danger?" she asked quietly. "No, sweetheart, we're not in physical danger," William assured her quickly. "But there are people who sometimes say unkind things about our family, particularly about Mummy, and we've been trying to decide how much you need to know about that." Charlotte thought about the conversation she had overheard earlier. Is it because of things people write on the internet? Catherine's expression showed surprise and concern. "What do you know about that?" Charlotte felt guilty, but knew she needed to be honest. "I heard you talking to Hannah today about people saying mean things and some of them mentioning us children." William and Catherine exchanged another of their meaningful looks, this one clearly communicating their realization that Charlotte had been absorbing more information than they had realized. "I think," William said slowly, "that it's time we had a more complete conversation about some of the realities of our public life." Catherine nodded in agreement. "Charlotte, you know that our family is in a unique position. People are interested in everything we do, and they have opinions about our choices, our appearances, our actions. Most people are kind and supportive," William continued. "But unfortunately, some people express their opinions in ways that are hurtful and unfair. Recently, there has been more negative commentary than usual, and some of it has been particularly harsh toward Mummy." Charlotte felt a surge of protective anger on her mother's behalf. "But why? Mummy is wonderful. She's kind to everyone and works so hard to help people." "Thank you for saying that, darling," Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion. "But sometimes people's opinions aren't based on truth or fairness. Sometimes they're based on misunderstandings or jealousy, or simply the fact that it's easier to criticize than to understand." Charlotte was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "What kind of mean things do they say?" William hesitated. "Some people criticize Mummy's choices about fashion, or her approach to royal duties, or the way she interacts with the media. Some question her background or her qualifications for her role." "That's ridiculous," Charlotte said indignantly. "Mummy is perfect for her role. She cares about people, and she works harder than anyone I know." Catherine smiled through tears that were beginning to form in her eyes. "Your loyalty means everything to me, sweetheart. But the reality is that public criticism is part of our life, and recently it's been more intense and more personal than usual." Charlotte felt a weight settling in her chest. "Is that why you've been having so many serious conversations? Is that why Hannah mentioned security?" William nodded gravely. Some of the commentary has crossed the line from criticism into more concerning territory. Nothing that suggests immediate danger, but enough that we need to be extra careful and extra aware. The hardest part, Catherine added, is that some of the criticism has extended to comments about you children. People questioning our parenting choices, or making predictions about your futures, or simply using your names in ways that feel invasive and inappropriate. Charlotte felt tears beginning to form in her own eyes. The idea that strangers were discussing her and her brothers in mean-spirited ways was both frightening and infuriating. Can't you make them stop? Unfortunately, freedom of expression means that people have the right to voice their opinions, even when those opinions are hurtful, William explained. What we can do is control how we respond to it, how we protect ourselves and each other, and how we focus on the positive relationships and experiences in our lives. But it's not fair, Charlotte said, her voice beginning to shake with emotion. You and Mummy work so hard to help people. You care about everyone and try to make the world better. Why can't they see that? Catherine moved from her chair to sit on the other side of Charlotte's bed, reaching out to take her daughter's hand. Life isn't always fair, my darling girl. But that doesn't mean we stop being kind, or stop working to help others, or stop believing in the good we can do. Charlotte looked back and forth between her parents, seeing the pain and frustration in their faces despite their attempts to remain calm and reassuring. What can I do to help? Just being yourself, William said immediately. Being the kind, thoughtful, intelligent young lady you are. Continuing to care about your education, your family, your interests. Not letting other people's negativity change who you are or what you believe about yourself and the people you love. And remember, Catherine added, that for every person who says something unkind, there are many more who support and appreciate our family. The negative voices are often the loudest, but they're not the majority. Charlotte nodded slowly, trying to absorb everything her parents had shared with her. Will you tell George and Louis about this too? We'll tell them what they need to know when they're ready to understand it, William replied. George is beginning to pick up on some of these issues naturally, and we'll have age-appropriate conversations with both boys as needed. For now, Catherine said, this is primarily something for you to process and understand. You've shown us tonight that you're mature enough to handle complex information, and we trust you to use this knowledge wisely. Charlotte felt the weight of her parents' trust and confidence, but also the burden of understanding challenges that seemed too big and too unfair for any family to face. I love you both so much, she said, her voice small but determined. And I'm proud to be your daughter, no matter what anyone else says. Both parents leaned in to embrace Charlotte simultaneously, creating a warm cocoon of love and protection around her. For several minutes, they simply held each other, drawing strength from their unbreakable family bond. We love you too, more than words can express, Catherine whispered. And we're so proud of the wonderful person you're becoming. As Charlotte settled back into her pillows, she felt emotionally exhausted but also somehow stronger. The truth was harder than the uncertainty had been, but it was also more manageable. She now understood what her family was facing, and she could be part of supporting each other through it rather than simply worrying about unknown problems. Sweet dreams, my brave princess, William said, kissing her forehead. Thank you for trusting me with the truth, Charlotte replied sleepily. I promise I won't let the mean people change how I feel about our family. As her parents turned off the lights and quietly left her room, Charlotte lay in the darkness thinking about everything she had learned. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she felt surrounded by love and armed with truth. She was beginning to understand that being a princess meant more than she had ever realized, but she was also discovering that she was stronger and braver than she had known. The house settled into nighttime, quiet around her, but Charlotte's mind continued to process the day's revelations. She thought about her mother's strength and grace under pressure, her father's protective love and honest communication, and her own emerging understanding of the complex world they navigated together. As sleep finally began to claim her, Charlotte made a silent promise to herself and her family. She would not let other people's unkindness diminish her joy or change her values. She would continue to be proud of her parents and confident in their love. And she would grow into the kind of person who could face whatever challenges lay ahead with courage and grace. The night passed peacefully, but Charlotte's childhood had subtly shifted that evening. She was no longer simply a protected princess living in a fairy tale world. She was a young girl beginning to understand the real complexities of her unique life and discovering that she had the strength and support system needed to face those complexities head-on. The next few days at Adelaide Cottage carried an undercurrent of change that only Charlotte seemed to notice. Armed with her new understanding of the challenges her family faced, she found herself observing everything with heightened awareness. The morning news briefings her father received seemed more serious. The phone calls her mother took were more frequent, and the security personnel around their property appeared more vigilant than usual. Charlotte woke on Thursday morning to the sound of hushed voices in the corridor outside her bedroom. Through her slightly open door, she could see her parents walking toward the stairs, their heads bent together in conversation. Her father was carrying what looked like a stack of newspapers, and her mother's posture suggested tension despite the early hour. As she got dressed for the day, Charlotte found herself moving more quietly than usual, instinctively trying to avoid drawing attention to herself while she processed the new dynamics in her household. She had promised her parents that she wouldn't let the negativity change her, but understanding the reality of their situation made her feel more protective of their family privacy and more aware of potential threats to their peace. When she arrived at breakfast, George and Louis were already eating, both of them chattering excitedly about their plans for the day. George had a science club meeting after his regular lessons, and Louis was looking forward to a promised afternoon in the garden with Maria, where they planned to build a fort out of fallen branches. "Good morning, darling," Catherine greeted Charlotte with a warm smile that seemed genuinely unforced. "How did you sleep?" "Very well, thank you," Charlotte replied, though she noticed that her mother was wearing slightly more makeup than usual, as if she needed extra armor for whatever the day might bring. William joined them a few minutes later, his usual morning energy subdued, but his attention to his children as focused as ever. "What are everyone's big plans for today?" he asked, settling into his chair and reaching for his coffee. As her brothers enthusiastically outlined their activities, Charlotte studied her father's face. She could see signs of stress in the slight tightness around his eyes and the way he was gripping his coffee cup a little too tightly, but she also saw his genuine interest in their daily lives and his determination not to let external pressures interfere with family time. "Charlotte, you have your art lesson with Miss Davies this morning, don't you?" Catherine asked. "Yes, and then English literature with Mr. Patterson this afternoon," Charlotte confirmed. She paused, then added, "Mummy, will you be home today, or do you have official engagements?" Catherine's expression showed a flicker of something, perhaps surprise at Charlotte's more formal terminology, or recognition that her daughter was thinking about their public duties in a new way. "I have a meeting at the foundation this morning, and then a school visit this afternoon," Catherine replied. "But I should be home by tea time." "Why do you ask?" "Just wondering," Charlotte said, though in truth she was beginning to worry about her mother's exposure to public scrutiny during official events. The knowledge that people were being particularly critical made every public appearance seem more fraught with potential difficulty. After breakfast, Charlotte made her way to the art room, a bright space on the second floor that had been converted specifically for her creative lessons. Miss Davies was already there, arranging supplies for what appeared to be a watercolor session. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness," Miss Davies said cheerfully. "I thought we might work on landscapes today. I've been admiring the view from this window. The gardens are particularly beautiful in the morning light." Charlotte nodded and took her place at the easel, but as she began to work with the paints, she found her mind wandering to her mother's upcoming public appearances. She imagined Catherine arriving at the school, smiling and engaging with children and teachers while photographers captured every moment and critics analyzed every word and gesture. "You seem rather thoughtful today," Miss Davies observed gently. "Is everything all right?" Charlotte paused, her brush hovering over the paper. She had always enjoyed the fact that Miss Davies treated her as both a student and a person, never talking down to her or avoiding meaningful conversations. "Miss Davies, do you ever read things about my family in the newspapers or online?" Miss Davies set down her own brush and turned to face Charlotte fully. "Sometimes, yes. It's natural for people to be interested in the royal family." "Why do you ask? Do you think the things people write are fair?" Charlotte asked carefully. Miss Davies considered her answer thoughtfully. "I think," she said slowly, "that the people who write about your family don't really know you personally. They make judgments based on photographs and brief public interactions, which can't possibly tell the whole story about who someone really is." Charlotte nodded, finding comfort in this perspective. "It must be hard to have opinions about people you've never actually met." "I imagine it would be," Miss Davies agreed. "But you know what I've noticed about your mother from the times I've interacted with her here at the house? She's always genuinely interested in whatever you're working on. She asks real questions and listens carefully to the answers. That tells me much more about her character than anything I might read in a newspaper." This observation made Charlotte smile for the first time that morning. "She does do that, doesn't she? Even when she's busy or worried about something, she still cares about our lessons and our interests." "Exactly. And that's the real measure of a person, how they treat the people in their daily lives, especially when they think no one important is watching." Charlotte returned to her painting with renewed focus, but she continued to think about Miss Davies' words throughout the morning. The idea that actions spoke louder than public commentary was both comforting and empowering. When the art lesson ended, Charlotte had some free time before lunch. She decided to spend it in the garden, where she often did her best thinking. The weather was mild and pleasant, with a gentle breeze that made the leaves dance on the trees her mother had planted when they first moved to Adelaide Cottage. She was sitting in her favorite spot under the gazebo when she heard her father's voice coming from the open windows of his study. He was on what sounded like an important phone call, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he used for official business. "I understand the concerns," he was saying, "but I won't have my family subjected to harassment under the guise of press freedom. There are boundaries, and some of the recent coverage has clearly crossed them." Charlotte felt a chill despite the warm weather. She hadn't realized that the situation might be serious enough to require her father's intervention in his official capacity as a member of the royal family. "My wife has conducted herself with nothing but dignity and professionalism," William continued, his voice growing firmer. "The personal attacks are unwarranted and unacceptable. I expect better protection for my family's privacy and safety." The conversation continued for several more minutes, but Charlotte found herself unable to concentrate on the specific words. The serious tone and the clear frustration in her father's voice told her everything she needed to know about the severity of the situation. When lunchtime arrived, Charlotte noticed that both of her parents seemed more tense than they had at breakfast. Her father's phone had been buzzing regularly throughout the morning, and her mother had that particular focused expression she wore when she was mentally preparing for challenging official duties. "How was your art lesson, sweetheart?" Catherine asked, clearly making an effort to maintain normal family conversation despite whatever pressures were building around their public responsibilities. "Very nice, Miss Davies, and I talked about the difference between how people appear in photographs and who they really are as individuals," Charlotte replied carefully. Both parents looked at her with sharp attention, clearly recognizing the deeper implications of such a conversation topic. "That's a very sophisticated subject," William noted. "What conclusions did you reach?" "That people who only know someone from pictures and news reports can't really judge their character," Charlotte said, "and that the way someone treats people in their daily life is more important than what strangers think about them." Catherine smiled, though Charlotte could see emotion gathering in her mother's eyes. Miss Davies sounds very wise. Those are good lessons to remember. After lunch, Charlotte settled in the schoolroom for her English literature lesson with Mr. Patterson. They were studying poetry, and today's focus was on works that dealt with themes of courage and perseverance in the face of adversity. Today we're going to read some poems by Maya Angelou, Mr. Patterson announced. She was an American poet who wrote about overcoming challenges and finding strength in difficult circumstances. As they worked through the poems together, Charlotte found herself drawn to the themes of resilience and dignity in the face of criticism. One poem in particular resonated with her current family situation. Mr. Patterson, when poets write about being strong during hard times, are they writing from personal experience? Often, yes, he replied. Many of the most powerful pieces of literature come from authors who have faced real challenges and learned something meaningful from those experiences. Charlotte thought about this as they continued reading. Do you think writing about difficult experiences helps people feel better about them? I think expressing feelings and experiences through art, whether that's poetry, painting, music, or any other form, can be very healing. It helps people process their emotions and often helps others who might be facing similar challenges. As the lesson progressed, Charlotte began to understand that their current family situation, while difficult and unfair, was not unique in human experience. People throughout history had faced unjust criticism and public scrutiny, and many had found ways to maintain their dignity and strength through those experiences. When the afternoon lesson ended, Charlotte learned that her mother had returned early from her official engagements. She found Catherine in her private sitting room, having changed out of her formal clothes into more casual attire, but her posture suggested that the day had been emotionally draining. "How did your school visit go?" Charlotte asked, settling into a chair near her mother. Catherine paused at her reading and looked up with a tired but genuine smile. "It was wonderful, actually. The children were so enthusiastic about their science projects, and the teachers were doing amazing work with limited resources. It reminded me why I love these types of engagements." "Were there photographers there?" Charlotte asked hesitantly. "Yes, there were. But you know what? I decided to focus entirely on the children and teachers I was meeting rather than worrying about how every moment might be captured or interpreted." Catherine set down her book and turned to face Charlotte fully. "I realized that if I let fear of criticism change how I interact with people, then I'm not really serving anyone well." Charlotte felt a surge of pride in her mother's strength. "That sounds like a good approach." "I think so too." And it felt good to remember that for every person who might criticize from afar, there are real people doing important work who appreciate support and recognition for their efforts. They sat together in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both processing the day's experiences in their own ways. Charlotte was beginning to understand that navigating public life required a careful balance between awareness of potential challenges and determination not to let those challenges overshadow the positive aspects of their work and relationships. "Mummy, do you think I'll have to deal with criticism like this when I'm older?" Catherine considered the question carefully. "Probably to some extent. But you know what gives me hope? Watching how thoughtfully you're processing all of this now. You're learning early that other people's opinions don't define your worth, and that's a valuable lesson that will serve you well throughout your life." Charlotte nodded, feeling both the weight of future challenges and the confidence that she was developing the tools to handle them. "I think I understand why you and Daddy work so hard to make sure we have normal family time together. It helps us remember what's really important." "Exactly. No matter what anyone else might say or think, we know who we are as a family, and we know how much we love and support each other. That's our foundation, and it's strong enough to weather any storm." As the afternoon progressed, Charlotte found herself feeling more settled than she had since learning about the family's current challenges. The combination of honest conversations with her parents and thoughtful discussions with her teachers was helping her develop a framework for understanding and coping with the unique pressures of her position. When William returned home that evening, Charlotte could see that his day had also been demanding, but there was a sense of resolution in his demeanor that suggested progress had been made in addressing some of the family's concerns. "How are my favorite ladies?" he asked, joining them in the sitting room and settling into his usual chair with a sigh of relief. "Better than this morning, I think," Catherine replied. "Charlotte and I have been having good conversations about focusing on what matters most." William smiled at Charlotte with obvious pride. "I'm so impressed with how you're handling all of this, sweetheart. It takes real maturity to process difficult information and find positive ways to move forward." As they prepared for dinner, Charlotte reflected on how much her understanding of her family's life had expanded in just a few days. She was beginning to see that while their royal status brought unique challenges, it also provided opportunities to make a positive impact on others' lives. The criticism and scrutiny were real and sometimes painful, but they didn't have to define the family's experience or diminish their commitment to their values and each other. That evening, as they gathered around the dinner table once again, Charlotte felt a deeper appreciation for these ordinary family moments. She understood now that they were not just pleasant interludes between official duties, but essential anchoring points that kept them grounded in love and authenticity despite the external pressures of public life. The conversations flowed more easily than they had the previous evening, and Charlotte could sense that her parents were feeling more confident about their approach to the current challenges. There was still underlying tension and concern, but there was also a renewed sense of purpose and family solidarity that gave everyone strength. As bedtime approached, Charlotte found herself actually looking forward to the quiet conversation time with her parents. Rather than feeling overwhelmed by difficult revelations, she was beginning to see these discussions as valuable opportunities to deepen her understanding and strengthen her resilience. She was growing up faster than any 8-year-old should have to, but she was doing so with the support of parents who trusted her with truth and equipped her with the emotional tools needed to handle whatever challenges lay ahead. Several weeks had passed since that pivotal bedtime conversation when Prince William had revealed the truth about the criticism facing their family. The initial shock and confusion Charlotte had felt were gradually giving way to a more nuanced understanding of her family's unique position and the responsibilities that came with it. On this particular Friday evening, Charlotte noticed an unusual lightness in the atmosphere at Adelaide Cottage. Her mother moved through the house with more natural ease. Her father's phone calls seemed less urgent, and the overall tension that had permeated their home environment appeared to be lifting. During dinner, William shared some positive news that helped explain the improved mood. "The legal team has made significant progress in addressing some of the more serious breaches of privacy," he announced, speaking carefully but with obvious relief. "Several publications have agreed to retract particularly harmful statements and implement better editorial standards." Catherine nodded with satisfaction, and the engagement schedule for next month is looking very positive. 3 events focused on children's literacy, a mental health awareness campaign, and the opening of a new community center. All causes I'm passionate about. Charlotte listened to this news with a sense of growing understanding. She was beginning to see how her parents navigated challenges not just by enduring them, but by actively working to improve the situation while continuing their important public work. "Does this mean people are being nicer now?" Lewis asked with the straightforward curiosity of a 6-year-old. William and Catherine exchanged one of their meaningful glances, this one containing amusement and tenderness rather than worry. "It means we're finding better ways to focus on the positive aspects of our work and protect our family from unfair treatment," Catherine explained gently. "There will always be people with different opinions, but we're learning how to make sure the important voices are the ones we hear most clearly." George, ever the analytical thinker, looked thoughtful. "So it's like filtering out the noise to hear the real signal." "That's actually a perfect way to put it," William said with pride in his eldest son's insight. "We're getting better at distinguishing between constructive feedback and meaningless noise. Charlotte felt a warm glow of satisfaction as she listened to this conversation. Her family had faced a real challenge and found ways to address it while staying true to their values and commitments. More importantly, they had done so as a team, with honest communication and mutual support. After dinner, the family settled into their usual evening routine, but tonight there was an extra sense of celebration in the air. William suggested they play a board game together, something they hadn't done in several weeks due to the stress and additional meetings that had consumed their evenings. As they gathered around the coffee table in the sitting room, Charlotte found herself studying her parents' faces. The worry lines that had been so prominent in recent weeks were softening, and their laughter came more easily. Catherine's eyes sparkled with genuine humor as she playfully argued about game rules with George, and William's competitive streak emerged as he tried to strategize his way to victory. "Mummy, you look really happy tonight," Charlotte observed during a break in the game. Catherine paused in organizing her cards and smiled warmly at her daughter. "I feel really happy tonight. Do you know what made the difference?" Charlotte shook her head, curious to hear her mother's perspective on their recent challenges. "Realizing that we have everything we need right here," Catherine said, gesturing around the room at her family. "Yes, there are people who will criticize and judge, but there are also people who support and believe in us. And most importantly, we believe in each other." William reached over and squeezed Catherine's hand. "Your mother is wise. We spent so much energy worrying about opinions that don't really matter that we almost forgot to appreciate all the wonderful things that do matter." Charlotte felt a deep sense of contentment wash over her. The past few weeks had been difficult and eye-opening, but they had also strengthened her family's bonds and helped her develop new resilience and understanding. "I'm glad I know the truth now," she said thoughtfully. "Even though it was scary at first, it's better than wondering and worrying about things I didn't understand." George looked up from his cards with interest. "What truth?" Charlotte glanced at her parents, who nodded encouragingly. They had discussed earlier that George was beginning to pick up on some of the same dynamics Charlotte had noticed, and they were prepared to have age-appropriate conversations with him as needed. "That sometimes people say mean things about our family, especially about Mummy, but that doesn't change anything about who we really are or how much we love each other," Charlotte explained simply. George considered this information with his typical analytical approach. "That does explain some of the serious phone calls and meetings lately. Are we going to be okay?" "We're going to be more than okay," William assured him firmly. "We're going to continue doing work we believe in, treating people with kindness and respect, and supporting each other through whatever challenges come our way." Lewis, who had been only half listening to this conversation while continuing to play with his game pieces, looked up with sudden attention. "Are people mean to us?" Catherine leaned over and gently smoothed his hair. "Most people are very kind to us, sweetheart. But there are a few people who sometimes say unkind things, just like there might be someone unkind at school occasionally. The important thing is that we don't let unkind words change how we treat others." Lewis nodded with the easy acceptance of childhood, then returned to his game pieces. Charlotte marveled at how naturally her little brother absorbed this information without the anxiety and complexity that had characterized her own initial reaction. As the evening continued, Charlotte found herself reflecting on how much she had grown during these past weeks. She had faced difficult truths about the challenges her family encountered, but she had also discovered reserves of strength and maturity she hadn't known she possessed. When bedtime arrived, Charlotte felt a sense of anticipation rather than the nervousness that had characterized her recent evening conversations with her parents. Tonight felt like a celebration of progress rather than a crisis management session. "How are you feeling about everything now?" Catherine asked as Charlotte settled into bed. "A few weeks ago, you were just beginning to learn about some of the more difficult aspects of our public life." Charlotte thought carefully about the question. "I feel sad that people can be mean for no good reason, and I feel angry that anyone would say unkind things about you when you work so hard to help others. But I also feel proud of how our family handled everything together." William sat down on the edge of her bed with a smile. Those are very mature feelings and very appropriate ones. It's okay to feel sad and angry about unfairness, as long as we don't let those feelings make us bitter or unkind ourselves. I've been thinking about what Miss Davies said about actions speaking louder than opinions, Charlotte continued. When I see you at official events, Mummy, or when people come to the house for meetings, I can tell that most people really respect and appreciate you. The mean voices might be loud, but they're not the majority. Catherine's eyes filled with tears of pride and gratitude. That's such an important insight, darling. And it's something that sometimes takes adults much longer to understand than you've managed in just a few weeks. Charlotte felt a warm glow of accomplishment at her mother's praise, but also a deeper sense of understanding about her family's role in the world. I think our job is to focus on the people who need help and support, rather than the people who just want to complain. Exactly, William agreed. And that's what we're going to keep doing. Your mother has some wonderful engagements planned for the coming months, all focused on causes she cares deeply about. The criticism hasn't disappeared completely, but we've learned how to manage it better and not let it overshadow the positive work. As her parents prepared to leave her room, Charlotte felt compelled to express something that had been building in her heart throughout the recent challenges. I want you both to know that I'm proud to be your daughter, she said earnestly. Not because you're royalty or because you have important titles, but because you're good people who care about others and face difficult situations with courage and grace. Catherine returned to the bedside immediately, gathering Charlotte into a warm embrace. Oh, my darling girl, that means more to me than any positive review or public approval ever could. William joined the embrace, wrapping both his wife and daughter in his arms. We're proud to be your parents too, Charlotte. Watching you handle these revelations with such wisdom and maturity has been one of the most impressive things I've ever witnessed. As her parents said their final goodnights and turned off the lights, Charlotte lay in the darkness feeling a profound sense of peace and security. The challenges hadn't disappeared entirely, and she understood now that criticism and scrutiny would always be part of their family's reality. But she also understood that they had something much more powerful than their critics. They had love, truth, mutual respect, and an unshakable commitment to each other and to their values. Over the following days, Charlotte noticed concrete evidence of the positive changes in their household. Her mother's official engagements were proceeding smoothly, with media coverage focusing on the substantive work rather than manufactured controversies. Her father seemed more relaxed during his business calls, and the general atmosphere of crisis management had given way to a more normal routine of royal duties and family life. More importantly, Charlotte observed that her own emotional resilience had strengthened significantly through the experience. When she occasionally overheard snippets of conversation about media coverage or public opinion, she no longer felt the spike of anxiety and confusion that had characterized her initial reactions. Instead, she had developed the ability to put such information in context and focus on what truly mattered. During a family walk through Windsor Great Park the following weekend, Charlotte found herself walking alongside her mother while her father played an elaborate game of tag with George and Louis among the ancient trees. Mummy, do you think I'll be stronger because of everything that's happened recently? Charlotte asked as they strolled along the familiar paths. Catherine considered the question thoughtfully. I think you were already strong, sweetheart. But, yes, I think you've discovered just how strong you are, and you've learned some valuable tools for handling difficult situations. Those are gifts that will serve you well throughout your life. Charlotte nodded, watching her father and brothers racing through the dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves. I feel like I understand our family better now. Not just the fun parts and the fancy events, but the real parts too. The real parts are actually the most important parts, Catherine agreed. The fancy events and official duties are meaningful because they allow us to serve others, but they're not what defines us as people. What defines us is how we treat each other, how we respond to challenges, and whether we stay true to our values, even when it's difficult. As they continued their walk, Charlotte reflected on how much her perspective had shifted in just a few weeks. She had gone from being a largely protected princess, living in a bubble of family love, to being a young girl who understood both the privileges and the challenges of her unique position. It hadn't been an easy transition, but it had been a valuable one. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Charlotte looked around the table with new appreciation. George was explaining his latest scientific theory with animated gestures. Louis was telling an elaborate story about the adventure he had imagined during their afternoon walk. Her parents were listening with genuine interest and affection, and everyone was laughing and talking over each other in the comfortable chaos of family life. This, Charlotte realized, was what mattered most. Not the opinions of strangers or the fluctuations of public approval, but the love and support and understanding that existed within their family circle. She had learned that while external challenges would always be part of their reality, internal strength and unity could overcome any obstacle. As the weeks turned into months, Charlotte continued to grow in confidence and understanding. The crisis that had initially seemed so overwhelming became a turning point in her development, teaching her lessons about resilience, truth, and the importance of staying connected to what truly mattered in life. She learned that being a princess meant much more than wearing beautiful clothes and attending elegant events. It meant serving others with dignity and grace, facing criticism with courage and wisdom, and maintaining strong family bonds despite the pressures of public life. Most importantly, she learned that she had the strength and support system needed to handle whatever challenges lay ahead in her unique and meaningful life. The hurt feelings and confusion that had marked the beginning of this journey were gradually replaced by confidence, understanding, and a deep appreciation for the love and truth that surrounded her every day. Charlotte had discovered that while the world could be harsh and unfair, her family's love was constant and unshakable, providing a foundation strong enough to weather any storm. And as she drifted off to sleep each night, secure in the knowledge that her parents trusted her with truth and supported her with unconditional love, Charlotte felt ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring.